Welcome to This Explainer. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer weight of your own thoughts, I want you to know something right off the bat. The most relatable, agonizing human struggles, they aren't modern at all. We are so quick to blame our fast-paced digital society for our mental burdens, but the truth is actually buried much, much deeper in our history.
I mean, think about this for a second. Have you ever been just going about a totally normal day, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, you feel this massive wave of sadness or anxiety without any logical cause whatsoever?
Or, oh, how about this one? A chilling, really unsettling sense of being judged or watched, not by a person in the room with you, but from inside your very own head?
Well, it turns out you are absolutely not alone, and you are definitely not the first person to feel this way. Like I said, these are modern anxieties. They were actually diagnosed 4,000 years ago by an ancient civilization that somehow managed to map the human mind with literally terrifying precision.
Section 1. The Disturbing Clay Tablet, unearthed in 1924, understood in 2019.
So we're talking about a small clay tablet roughly the size of the palm of your hand, wrapped in bitumen, which is a type of ancient asphalt. It was discovered beneath the ruins of Nippur in modern-day Iraq. And here is where it gets wild. When it was sent to London in 1925, the first translator actually just stopped reading after only 12 lines. Why? Because they noted the content was simply too disturbing. So it got mistakenly labeled as some boring agricultural grain inventory and was locked away in a dusty warehouse for almost a century, literally gathering dust. It wasn't until 2019 that a PhD student in Berlin requested it for a routine study. And in a single afternoon, they realized, wow, this is no inventory of cattle or grain. It was a complete catalog of the human psyche.
Section 2. Thoughts as outside visitors, the Sumerian view of consciousness.
To truly wrap our heads around what this tablet translates, we really have to understand that the Sumerians did not believe the brain produced all of our thoughts. Instead, they viewed the mind as a sort of terminal, right? And thoughts were just traffic arriving from the outside. The absolute closest translation we have for these external visitors is, well, the word parasite. And that term implies intelligence and immense patience. They believe these entities basically attach themselves to human consciousness to feed on our mental energy. The tablet categorizes 12 of them, explicitly stating that every single human being carries at least 4 of these entities at any given time, no exceptions.
And this just brilliantly illustrates how incredibly advanced their understanding was. Because before even naming the 12 parasites, the tablet lists 6 pre-signs of infection. Things like persistent returning thoughts, the inability to sit in silence without desperately seeking distraction, and memories of things that didn't even happen feeling heavier than real ones. Guys, this is a 4,000-year-old, picture-perfect clinical description of what modern psychology calls clinical anxiety and rumination. It's mind-blowing.
Section 3. The internal voices, when the mind echoes.
Okay, let's look at the first major cluster of parasites. These are the ones that really mess with the internal voices in our heads. The first and honestly the most common parasite was known as the talker. Now, every human has an inner voice, obviously, but the Sumerians warned of a second voice that learns to perfectly imitate yours. It starts offering thoughts that you completely confuse for your own, literally saying I when it isn't actually you. And the creepy part, it doesn't introduce wild, crazy ideas. It's so much more subtle than that. It just subtly inserts thoughts that are a little more cruel, maybe a little more pessimistic, just convincing you that things are gonna go wrong. Modern psychology actually has a very specific name for this. We call it negative self-talk, or the inner critic.
Then, moving on, we have the third parasite, which they call the echo. The echo doesn't create original thoughts at all. It just takes a thought you already had and repeats it, but louder and more definitively. The tablet warns that when you find yourself reviving an argument in your head for hours on end, long after it's over, that is not a memory, that is the echo actively feeding on unresolved conflict. And this perfectly, seamlessly aligns with how modern therapists describe and treat cognitive rumination, which is essentially getting stuck in those terrible, unresolved mental loops.
The fourth entity is particularly eerie. It's called the witness behind the eyes. So the Sumerians believed we all have a true, silent inner self that just observes the world. But this parasite? It's an imitation that constantly comments and judges. It makes you hyper-aware of how you are being perceived by others, even when you are sitting entirely alone in a room. Over time, the host starts to feel like they're acting on an invisible stage rather than actually living their life. If you have ever dealt with imposter syndrome or intense social anxiety, this 4,000-year-old description is probably hitting very, very close to home right now.
Section 4.
The emotional drains: hunger, sorrow, and anger.
Now we are going to shift gears to the parasites that actively drain your emotional vitality. The second one on the entire list is hollow hunger, and this one feeds purely on desire. It's the exact reason why achieving a massive life goal sometimes feels completely empty the very next day. Hollow hunger doesn't want you to get what you want, it wants you to remain in a perpetual state of wanting. It pushes you to immediately just crave the next big thing. This perfectly mirrors the modern psychological concept of the hedonic treadmill. The idea that humans just constantly return to a baseline level of happiness no matter what we buy or achieve. It's exactly what drives our insatiable consumerism today.
Looking at the rest of this category, we find a group called the silent drainers. And this list is truly fascinating. First, there's the long sorrow. This isn't normal grief. It's a heavy melancholy that arrives without cause and can last for years. The tablet specifically notes it can be passed down from a parent who never spoke of it to their most sensitive child. I mean, that is an astonishing prediction of what we now firmly recognize as intergenerational trauma. Then there's borrowed anger. This one latches onto your unprocessed rage and amplifies tiny, meaningless annoyances like city traffic into furious outbursts. There's also the comparing eye, which learns your specific insecurities and forces totally unfair comparisons just to cause you suffering. And finally, the static. That vague, low-level anxiety and pressure that suddenly fills the silence the exact moment you stop distracting yourself.
Section 5. The ultimate identity threat. The 12th parasite.
Skipping ahead past a few sleep-disturbing entities, we finally arrive at the last and undoubtedly most terrifying entity on the list. They called this one simply the undoing. Unlike the other 11 parasites that feed on the host but leave the core person intact, the undoing feeds on your actual, true inner witness. It slowly imitates your core self, piece by piece, until it entirely replaces it. And the scariest part, it happens completely without the host even noticing. The ancient writers noted that this parasite is the reason why some people seem to have completely departed and lost their soul long before their physical bodies actually die. It is an incredibly powerful, almost poetic metaphor for completely losing touch with who you truly are.
Section 6. The ancient cure. The expulsion protocol.
Okay, I know this is heavy stuff, but fortunately, the damaged tablet also contains a highly detailed section on exactly how to reclaim your mind. They called this process the expulsion or the listening. The steps are profoundly simple yet notoriously difficult to actually do. You are instructed to sit in silence and firmly resist the urge to seek distraction. As thoughts arrive, just observe them. You must honestly question if each thought is truly yours or if it belongs to one of those unseen visitors. The text warns that this silence will be incredibly uncomfortable at first, but if you endure it for weeks, the empty silence will eventually begin to feel like a presence. That presence is your true, original self waiting to be heard. And you know what? This is shockingly identical to the modern mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that are used today.
The tablet ends with a single standalone line. There's no signature, no date, just this one profound instruction. The Berlin PhD student translated this chilling, really beautiful final line as follows. On the day you listen to yourself for the first time, on that day they will begin to leave. It's a timeless, ancient invitation to true self-awareness. It's the realization that not every thought in your head is a fact, and more importantly, not every thought in your head is actually you.
So to wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to ponder. Knowing that a 4,000-year-old civilization maps the struggles of the human mind with such astonishing, poetic accuracy, which of these unseen visitors do you recognize most in yourself? And much more importantly, by sitting in silence and finally listening, which one do you need to evict today?